Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, we are opening up day 2 of the 2024 Spellbinders Crafty Advent Calendar. Each day for the first 24 days in December, I'm going to be opening up one of the windows from this calendar and then creating something with it. So if you haven't seen day 1 yet, it'll be in the same playlist as this one is. They're all going to be in the same playlist. I'm going to use some distressed watercolor paper, and I decided to watercolor this image. I'm first going to stamp and emboss it using my Misti stamping tool. The one thing that I like to do when I have a brand new stamp is I take a white eraser and I erase the stamping surface. This just removes any manufacturing residue that may be on the stamp, and it helps it take the ink a little bit better. Once I've done that stamp, it never needs to be done again. I don't need to keep doing it every time I use it, just when it's brand new and when I am first using it. So I couldn't decide if I wanted to have the floral cluster in the bottom left and the top right corner, if I wanted to move it into a different orientation. Ended up going with my first instinct, which is the bottom left corner, and then I'm going to stamp and emboss it again in the top right corner. I'm also using the sentiment that comes with the stamp. It was absolutely perfect and it works well with this image. I stamped it twice with VersaMark ink. I did go over my cardstock with an embossing powder tool. This is just going to help that embossing powder stick to the ink and not elsewhere on my paper. If by chance you get any of the powder sticking elsewhere, before you emboss it, you can use a soft brush and you can brush it off. Mine was just fine, so I could go right ahead and start heat embossing. If you've never done embossing before, the powder sticks to the VersaMark ink. The VersaMark ink is a nice sticky ink, and you use the embossing tool to melt that powder in place. And it's kind of a mesmerizing technique when you first learn it. And it's a nice basic one. For doing watercoloring, it gives the watercolor just a different texture, and it also adds a nice, in this case, gold sheen to the outside because I'm using gold powder. You can use whatever color you're wanting. Now for my second stamping, I did clean my stamp off with a damp cloth and then dry it off. I wanted to make sure that ink was only going to stick where the embossing powder was only going to stick where I stamped it. At some point when I was finished doing my first embossing, I kind of smeared one of the parts of the H. So I just used a distress embossing pen and colored in that area, poured my powder on, and embossed it exactly the same as I embossed the very first section. For my background, I decided to use some Karin markers. I scribbled them on my surface, and then I misted my watercolor paper with just my mighty mister to make sure it was all wet. And then I'm using a wide brush to kind of do a wash over the background. This just takes the whiteness out of it, but it makes the color tone that I'm going to be using to color the flowers very, very light, very muted, so it's not going to compete with that. For the second color, I'm using the blue. This is Arctic Blue. It's number 264. The first color was Magenta, 359. These are both Karin markers, and they're a nice liquid marker, and I really love them for doing watercoloring because the colors are really beautiful and vibrant. So I'm just adding the blue in some random places, and it's mainly just to break up the pink. I chose the blue because any areas that are, I go over the pink with the blue, it's going to have a purple tone to it. The third color that I'm using for my watercolored image is the greenery, or green for the greenery. And I kind of figured if I went over some of the pink with the green, I would end up getting a little bit more of a muddy background, and I didn't want that. So the blue worked perfect. Once I was done that, I used my heated tool to dry it completely before starting to watercolor my images. I use the heated tool because it's a much gentler heat than my embossing tool. You could use the embossing tool, but you'd want to make sure to hold it a little bit farther away. Make sure to move it around a lot so that you're not going to remelt that powder and possibly heat your paper a little bit too much. The heated tool is nice and gentle, so I don't have to worry about being too far away. I can be nice and close to the paper, and I can concentrate the air that it is emitting in different areas if one area doesn't dry quite as fast as the others. For my watercoloring my images, I started with my magenta, which is 359. And I put the color in the center or to the base of the petal first, and then wiped off the color off my brush and used that clean brush to spread the color out a little bit more. If by chance you don't have your centers as dark as you want, you can easily go back in and dot your marker right to the cardstock. It's going to add little dots of ink, and because those areas are wet, they're just going to immediately start bleeding and blending out. You can then use your water brush to help it along if it's not blending out or bleeding out quite as much as you want. But it's a really great way to just add that darkness, that deepness in the centers or at the base of the petals really, really easily. Now, I like to use a water brush that has water in the handle. I tend to be a little bit of a klutz, so if I had a jar of water on my desk, there's a high chance that I'm going to knock it over. By using a water brush that has the water in the handle, I don't have to worry about that at all. I have a piece of paper towel to my right. That's what you're seeing me go for regularly. And all I'm doing is either brushing off the excess color off my brush or squeezing a little bit of water through my brush to clean it off for my next color. This is one of my favorite tools. I've had it for so many years. I want to say I've had this one for probably nearly 15 years now. It still works just like new, and I absolutely love it for watercoloring. I wouldn't do anything without it. Now, I'm going to do exactly the same technique for all of the different areas that I'm watercoloring. The nice part about having embossed the image first is I don't need to wait for one area to dry before starting to watercolor a different area. That embossing adds just a tiny little ridge, so it's going to keep your watercolor where you put it. Now, if you're a little bit messy and you go outside of the lines, it's not going to stop it from going outside of the lines. And there's a couple places that I did go outside of the lines, but because that background has a nice wash to it, it's not super noticeable. At the very end, I'll show you a spot where I went outside the lines with some green and how I make it look a little bit better. You can't completely eliminate the watercolor once it has dried on there, but you can lighten it up a tiny little bit. So I'm doing the blue flowers next. These are the same Arctic blue that I used on my background. So this is number 264, and you can see how the flowers or the pink flowers and the blue flowers are so much more vibrant than that background, so it's not competing at all and it's not blending right into the background. It's complementing each other nicely. For the green, I'm using 228 Lush Green. This is a nice, almost a Kelly green, but it's got a little bit of a blue tone to it. So I'm doing the same technique as I did with both of the flowers. I'm wetting the areas first, then adding just a touch of color with my water brush. And then when I want it to be a tiny little bit deeper, I will go directly into those areas with my Karin marker. And then I can use my brush to blend it out. Now, eventually I do get to the point where I just wet that area with my water brush and then dot the Karin marker right on there and then just use that water brush to blend it out, mainly because these particular leaves are so tiny. With the embossed detail, there's such small areas to color that if I were to add color to the leaf, then do the Karin marker and then blend it out, likely it would all have the same color tone. So the easiest thing to do is just wetting those leaves, dotting the marker, and then just blending it out a tiny little bit. Once I have my image completely done, you can either let it dry naturally, or because I wanted to finish my card so that I could start editing my video, I went and used my heated tool once again to dry it. And same for that background. When you're doing the wash on the background, if you don't have a heated tool or don't have a way to dry it gently, you can let it dry naturally before you do your watercoloring on your florals. You don't have to have that heated tool. It's a tool that I have. I use it often. I've had it for many years, so regularly I'll just bring it out because it makes things go just a little bit quicker. It's perfect for doing mixed media and stuff like that because you can use it to dry different mediums and it's not too hot for that. So there I just pointed out where I went out of the lines with the green, and to fix it and lighten it up, I just took my brush with no color in it, just wiped over that area that has that green with just some clear water, and then used my paper towel to blot it. So like I said before, it doesn't completely get rid of that color, but it does lighten it significantly. So it's still there, but it's very light, and it kind of just blends into that color washed background. For my card base, I just have a white card base here. I have a piece of brushed gold cardstock. This is from the gold or treasured gold cardstock pack from Spellbinders, and that is cut to 5 3/8 by 4 1/8. And then I cut down my watercolor piece here down to 5 1/8 by 3 7/8. So I have a nice gold outline right here on the card, and it ties in beautifully with the gold on my florals. So here is our finished card for day 2. It's a really quick and easy watercolor card. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed watching a project being made from day number 2. I will see you tomorrow for day number 3.